The weather was hot, but not so astonishing in the Mediterranean. The island they were on was a busy port and Hara was hoping to pick up a decent cargo. Gideon, her constant shadow, was looking around as he followed her. He and Angel had come to some agreement as Angel watched out one way and he the other. Gideon said conversationally, "I think I like the sunshine. Never get much of it in the capital. Though I really can't blame geography for that. I didn't leave the campus very often." Hara glanced over at him and asked, "Do you miss it? I mean working with other academics and such. I don't think there are even books on the blazing blunderbuss." Gideon shook his head. "I was bored, so it was easier to keep my head down. This is by far more interesting. But I think we should get some books. The others would probably like a library. I did find some books in my room, but none of them are appropriate for the young impressionable minds on the ship. Who would have guessed pirates would be so smutty?" Hara knew Alice would appreciate some books. She was educated, and though she had to leave everything she knew behind, it would be nice to give her something of home while they traveled. It also might be a good idea to teach Liam how to read and write. Hara was already teaching him how to keep up the engine on the blazing blunderbuss, but he would need to be able to read and write to go to the next level. Though maybe she could con Gideon into teaching the boy. Liam was good with numbers, and Gideon might be able to put off his dislike of human beings long enough to teach the boy. Hara didn't know about Henry. He could have taken a job here or any other place they had stopped recently, but he always managed to come up with another excuse for why he would stay with the ship a little longer. Hara thought he had the same problem as her. She had always felt she had nowhere where she belonged, until the blazing blunderbuss. She could be herself and not worry about what others thought. Hara knew she would have to thank Gideon for that someday, but she knew if she thanked him now he would be insufferably smug for days. She was just about to say something when Angel called out a warning and Gideon shoved her. Hara stumbled and turned to glare at him, but he wasn't there, he was running. She chased after him and saw he was chasing someone. She pulled out her gun and aimed at a rope which was holding up an awning just in front of the running men. She shot and cut the rope. The awning fell and tangled up with the running man. Gideon jumped on the man. When she approached, he had the man facing up and sitting on the man's chest. Gideon growled, "Why were you shooting at us?" It was then she noticed the crossbow tucked into the man's belt. A little archaic, but it had been silent. A shiver went down her spine. That shove had probably saved her life. The assassin smashed his head forward, surprising Gideon. He shoved Gideon and he fell into a bucket of pig's blood. The man managed to get a knife and she went to shoot the man, but the assassin pulled a woman against his chest and pressed the knife to her throat. Hara put her gun down and the assassin let the woman go and turned and ran. Gideon made a disgusted sound and said, "Arg, are we going to go after him?" He tried to clean himself off, but the blood had soaked into his clothes. Hara shook her head. Assassins weren't the kind to tell their secrets. She caught Gideon's arm and said, "I'm afraid we can't stick around to find out. Someone would have heard this commotion." He blinked, confused for a moment. But he was the assassin. Angel trilled in agreement with Gideon. Even though Gideon was older than her, he was sometimes naive. "Yes, and I'm sure they will be happy to listen to us while they throw us into a prison." He shrugged and followed after her. Gideon asked, "Why do you think he attacked?" "I don't know, and that worries me more." She tugged on his arm as she spoke. Her eyes kept a watch for people who were paying too much attention to them. This wasn't something new to her. Gideon seemed unconcerned. "Oh, why is that?" Someone ducked their heads away, making her look at them, but they were closing up their shutters. There was nothing to fear from them. "Well, if it were the Roshbarkers, then I know where to go to hurt them, but since you blew up their weapon, they seem to have cut their losses," Hara said distractedly. Gideon asked with a small frown. Are you sure this isn't the Rushbarkers? We did blow up their fancy little weapon after all. Hara shook her head and placed her hand on his chest to stop him from stepping out of the alleyway. A few soldiers rushed past and she motioned when it was clear again. No, it wasn't the Rushbarkers. They were pawns of the Rosh government. With that plan not viable, they will find their funding drying up very quickly. The Rosh won't want the Barkers to have free reign. So, though they might still be around, they don't have the funding to send assassins after us. No, we don't have to worry about the Rushbarkers. They were almost to the blazing blunderbuss. Oh, I didn't realize they were working for the Rosh government. That is a dangerous game. Using people like pawns like that. Gideon said speculatively. Hara didn't disagree, but it wouldn't be the first time a government used people. A desperate game. The Rosh doesn't want to be consumed by the Empire. Gideon shrugged and said, most countries say that, but over time they don't particularly care who the government is as long as they are looked after. The Empire will only go after Rosh if they believe the government is ineffective. At the moment they are effective, so they have nothing to worry about. Hara turned to glance at him and said, you know that? He nodded and explained. If the Empire decided it needed more land, it would finish eating up the Middle East. Hara had to agree there. That would take a while, and she wondered if the Empire would go after something easier in the meantime. But if Gideon was right, they would only go after weak countries, and Rosh was far from weak. They reached the blazing blunderbuss and she called up for the ladder. For the moment all they would care about was staying out of an island prison and the sights of assassins.